You're listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets. Welcome. Thank you very much for tuning in again. This is the next episode of The Builder's Mindset. This should be episode 10. And I am fortunate this week is our first guest episode. Last week we talked about product development. And as I said when I first started the series, that I was going to get to the place where we were going to start to bring experts in on the topics that we talked about the week prior. So we could go a little bit deeper and bring in some folks who have a multitude and a depth of experience in the topics that we're discussing. This week it's product development, and I have the pleasure and honor of having with us Brian Juedes, who is the National Vice President of Product Development, correct, for Taylor Morrison?
Yes.
And you've been there. I think Brian is an old friend of mine, still a good friend of mine. Brian and I have worked together for a number of years. I think over the last 7 or 8 years or so at Meritage Homes and at Taylor. You've got, looking at you, I would never believe it, Brian, but as I was looking at your LinkedIn history, you have almost 40 years of experience in the home building industry. Is that correct?
Well, almost 40 years of professional design experience, but the first 11 years of my career were actually commercial, industrial, and institutional building design. And the last 27 years have been solely residential design.
Wow. And you've done some time, you're at Taylor Morrison now. You spent some time at Meritage. You were also at Shea. And then you had a long stint, about 14 years at the Felton Group, right? Is that correct?
Yes, servicing the residential production builders, both in architecture and engineering. So I've been both on the consultant side and on the builder side for the last 27 years, back and forth.
Well, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate that. And I was looking at your LinkedIn page because, as we talked about before we got on here today, and I noticed maybe you could share with everybody. And I highly recommend all of our listeners, if you want to learn more about product development and design in residential construction or in general, Brian has a wealth of knowledge. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about your history and your experience beyond your work history. You're a PE and an SE, and I think some of our listeners might want to know specifically what an SE is, and maybe a PE, maybe just because I know, I don't want to assume that anybody knows that, and also a licensed architect. Tell us a little bit about your experience, your history, and your education.
Sure, thank you. So a civil engineer by schooling, and that's the PE, professional engineer for civil engineer, which is multidisciplined. And then a structural engineer with a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin. So now we're focused on just structures. So the SE stands for structural engineering. And then after I got out of college and worked for several years, I took on my architect's training and got my architect's license after school. So I am a civil engineer, a structural engineer, and a registered architect in multiple states. But here in Arizona, I checked a few years ago, and there were only 3 of us that were licensed in all 3 disciplines at the same time. And there's thousands and thousands of architects and engineers throughout the state of Arizona, but only 3 that had all 3 registrations. One had just retired, the other one did commercial, and I was the only one that did residential.
That's amazing. And I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, so you don't have a degree in architecture, but you studied and got your license. I would think that is more rare than there are lots of people who go to school for architecture and then don't actually get licensed, right? And I know it's a pretty rigorous feat even after you've gotten the degree to get licensed. So would you agree with that? It's kind of like a little unique in the field of things?
Yeah, architects and engineers are unique as a combo. It's black and white, cats and dogs, opposites, definitely. And most of them that I know, and there's only a few, but most of those were architects first and engineers second. And I did it the other way around. I did engineering first, architecture second. And yeah, the exam for architects is more rigorous than the exam for engineers. When I took it back in the 90s, it was a 4-day in-person exam. So for 4 straight days, you would go to the convention center and sit in a big room with all the other test takers and sit there all day long, 8 to 9 hours a day, taking these tests for 4 straight days.
And you passed on your first go?
I did.
Well, go Badgers, as you mentioned, Wisconsin. And so, how are your Badgers doing this year?
So. They have a big game coming up this week against Penn State, who's ranked third, but it is at Camp Randall in Madison. So there's a chance.
All
If
right.
they could knock off Penn State, that would really raise them up quite a bit in the rankings.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll make sure I root for them. And so with that, that interesting combination that you said, like engineering and architecture, having had the just the honor of working with you, I think for about a total of 7 years that you and I have actually worked together at the same organization. It's just very insightful, and just what a benefit it was as a purchasing individual, trying to get the best design to work with somebody who understands both the structure and the design of things. And I think I highly recommend to anybody out there. And part of this whole series is about trying to encourage purchasing folks and just operational folks in the construction industry to take more of an interest in product design and product development. But I highly recommend, most builders, I think, outsource it, right? Some of them have in-house architecture, but I would venture to bet the vast majority of builders outsource their engineering. Probably more of them have architecture in-house than engineering in-house. And it has just been so how much I learned from working with you, knowing both of those disciplines and watching your ability to combine design and value together, which brings me to the first thing I wanted to ask you about. So I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, as I said, and I highly recommend listeners go check you out. You've been doing this series on LinkedIn. It's great. It's a little short read, but I think you do it about once a week. It looks like you've been doing it for about 4 months. How do you call? I think is it. How do we put more home in home building? Is that correct?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. It's been fun. It stemmed from the recognition that some of the biggest builders in the United States are starting to create more of a commodity, that a home is a box and a commodity. And with all the plan reduction and value engineering and optimization and streamlining that's going on in the industry, there are some who are concerned that we're just going to end up with this commodity of housing, commercial production housing, and it's going to just be boxes. And, I wanted to present some ideas to help us avoid that. And we can still be operationally efficient and deliver products, but make sure there's still homes that, people live in them and have their lives in these boxes. So I wanted to make sure and discuss many different ways on how we can keep more home or put more home in home building today. So yeah, just this week I put out number 16 and about one a week. So you're right on with about the 4-month estimate. And I have one more that I had planned to do. So I was going to stop at lucky number 17. So there'll be one more coming out within the next few days, the last one, I think, in that series.
Oh,
Maybe
well,
I'll maybe
if
I'll
I can
start something
encourage
else.
you, maybe how about this? What if think about this? You don't have to answer now, but what if you did them in like seasons, and then like each season had 17, because I think they're wonderful. They're always insightful. I think you find like I try, like when I have some value, I like to put comments on them, and I think we had a good little discussion today about them. So if you're at all thinking about it, I want you to just at least consider for our listeners, because now that we brought it up, that maybe you would think about a season 2 after 17. And if you're in the home building industry and you have any interest in design, I highly recommend go to Brian's LinkedIn page and look through his posts and look at the last 16 that he's put out. And the one let's talk really quickly about the one you just put out. You were talking about the design of the primary suite in terms of the bedroom location, the bathroom, and the closet. And tell us a little bit about what you shared with the LinkedIn community today on that.
Sure. Yeah, it was the title is around paths of travel in the home, and one of the paths of travel is from the primary bedroom to the primary bath. And what we see is really two main configurations of these three spaces: the primary bedroom, the primary bath, and the walk-in closet. So today's standard is almost 99.9% walk-in closets in primary bedrooms. Regardless of the size of the product, even down to our smallest townhomes, they still typically will have a walk-in closet in the primary. So of these three spaces then, how you arrange them, most today like to see the primary bath and the primary walk-in closet to be adjacent to one another. So we're setting these three spaces up. But there are rare occasions when the walk-in closet cannot be adjacent to the bath. So excluding of that, let's say we have these three spaces, they're all connected. There's two main ways to do it. One is what I call the terminal bath. So you go from the bedroom through a closet hallway, where the closets might be on both sides or one side or the other of this hall circulation space. And then it's the terminal bath. The bath is at the end of this circulation space. This arrangement is quite popular in Florida today, still, and in the Southeast. So it's very regional. The one that's more common everywhere else, all in the West, in Texas, the Midwest, the Northeast, everywhere else you go, the terminal closet is more common, where the bathroom comes first off of the primary bedroom, the bathroom's first, and then the closet's at the end of that. And what that does is it gives us a bigger walk-in closet. You've basically reduced circulation space by putting a closet at the end. You're circulating through the bathroom, which needed an aisle space anyhow. So it's more functional use of the square footage to have the terminal closet. But there are some markets and some clients that still prefer the terminal bath.
Wow. And do you know, is there any genesis of why those markets, like what are the sort of the pros and cons of like having it one way or the other, or?
It comes down to subjective personal opinion and tastes. I don't have a lot of data or focus groups or surveys on it. I just know when I ask and when I want to flip it one way or the other, I get some pushback. And people don't like change always. And if they're accustomed to one over the other, they just have that paradigm that they want to see it that way.
Yeah, I think maybe some of those folks, if they can't articulate it, we should get them to read the Simon Sinek book. Let's start with why to understand. Because I can see for me, I've spent most of my career in home building in Colorado and in the Western United States, where it is that terminal closet, and I'm used to that. However, I can see, and you and I have talked about this a lot about like, where do we put the doors? We'll save this for a whole other episode, but right, is there a door between the primary bedroom and the primary bathroom? Is there a door between the primary bathroom and the primary closet? To me, like, I'm more used to that other scenario where it is the terminal closet, but I can open my mind to saying, well, but if you have partners in a house where they get up at different times, sort of, it would be better to have that bathroom a little further away, I would think, because there's more noise going on there, and particularly if one is, if the early riser is not the, or say if the late riser is a light sleeper, it could be better to have that little buffer there. But it's interesting when people can't really articulate, which is interesting. So once again, I'm going to encourage you to consider a second season, because I think it's been super valuable and I really enjoy the insights and the way you present them. You've just always been so good about, and your communication style. I've really enjoyed how you can speak both to architects and engineers. They're unique individuals in and of themselves, and they're unique between the two. And I've seen you do everything from sit in a room with a framer and talk shop with that framer in a way that brings them to the table and encourages them to think openly about new designs. To I've seen you being in a room speaking as an engineer with another engineer who is the engineer of record on a project, and those folks can get very, very kind of particular about like defending their equations and their formulations. And you've just been very good about how you deliver your message and your way of getting people to just think about other things. And that comes across in all of these posts, and I've really enjoyed them. So I'm going to encourage you to keep doing those. And with that, this would be a great time to segue into like our first real big question for you today that I think our listeners would really appreciate to hear is how important is product development and design in the overall success of a home builder, and why would you say that? And like you can kind of like things come sales, profit, performance, production, but like when you think about how different home builders approach it, why is it so important to the overall success of the builder?
Mm. Great question, Mike. Um, and it clearly is important, but it is not the most important thing, obviously, right? And I think we all know who have worked in the industry, or we can look at customer surveys or realtor focus groups or research studies or ask any expert, and they'll tell you the number one rule of real estate is location. Right? So we know that's number one, location, location, location is the old adage that everybody knows, and it clearly is true. Locations first. And then what the research and the experts say, number two is price today. And that's clearly true with interest rates and affordability crisis and where we are today, that number two is price. And then thankfully, in third place, a solid third place is product.
Okay.
And there's many examples of this. We can pick.
At least it made the podium, right? Like,
It
you know.
did. We got the bronze. So uh, many examples of this. We can look at a really good location and a product that's a little underwhelming potentially, and it sells like hotcakes. And then we can see examples where the product is stellar, award-winning product, but if it's in the wrong location, it doesn't sell, or the wrong price. So in this third position, we're happy. It is very important. It certainly affects sales. It affects margins. It affects profitability, return on investment to do this right and to get our product designed for the best value at each different price point that we have, be it entry level, move up, or luxury. We're trying to provide the best value we can in all three of those silos of production housing.
It's interesting, and I love that the way you put that way, and I think that all of them are important, right? All of the top three, and so you can't go at any community or any project that you're thinking about buying and not put the three of them together, right? When we put a pro forma together, we look at that location and we have to think about what kind of product goes there. Like you said, is it entry? Is it move up? Is it luxury? And we've got to kind of be in a bandwidth, right? And I would say, and you and I have worked together, there's a little bit of wiggle room, right? Like in some builders will say, like let's say it's a move up. I think that's the easy one because you and I, we used to work with Rusty Crandall. I love Rusty used to always talk about. I love Rusty. He had so many euphemisms that I still remember to this day. But I remember he was talking about the tweeners. And like there's in every set of data, I think you've done a lot of data crunching. There's these tweeners, and so let's look at like the move up from a tweener because you can choose. You can look at a location and go, hey, it's definitely not entry level, and it's definitely not luxury. But where is it in that tweener world? And maybe it's a little higher or a little lower. And from a price perspective, I think you can have that as well too, based on, but that's a little bit less fungible, I think, the price per se, particularly in the higher interest rates. But also then when you get to product, you can be a little in that, hey, do we want to go a little up because we're okay maybe taking a slower absorption and we feel like we want a little bit different product from a value perspective or from a, I hate the word quality because I don't want to give anybody the impression. Like I truly think that most builders are out there trying to build the best possible house they can. And some builders, as we know, and we've worked with some of them, like we're going to go on the value side of things and we're going to stay on the lower end of that range. And I think I like to say, and I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but there is a range, and sometimes builders will get out of that range, whether it's intentional or it's not. If it's often unintentional that they end up outside this range. Another thing Rusty used to say, he used to call it spec creep. Like some builders will allow you do a little bit extra, and then you see another competitor do this, and you add that, and you start to realize that your spec has crept and you've gotten higher out of that range. Some builders will go the other way, and they won't be very thoughtful about their want versus need analysis for those homeowners in terms of what and you'll pull out some stuff that maybe that they need, and you think it's a want, so you can end up on the other end of the spectrum. When you think about like that range and how builders have to put that together, what do you think it is that builders and architects, product developers, be it project managers or purchasing folks, if they've got some oversight, what do you think it is that they focus on too much or they overlook when they're doing that product design and trying to fit that right product or pick that library product off the shelf to put it there? What do you think they either, and you can both, maybe it's what do they focus too much on and what do they focus not enough on?
Yeah, well, great question, Mike. I think I'll hit both. I think today the affordability crisis is here, and it looks like it's here to stay, and nothing's changing. That this entry level block, this lower third of the market, is where the bulk of the buyers are today, and all the builders have recognized it. And because of that, they're looking to reduce costs and find ways to deliver a home, a brand new home at a lower price today by reducing costs. And unfortunately, what they do too much of is operate in this 2D world, this flat 2D world. And the 2Ds are delete and despec. That's what they do. Those are the first two things, right? And sometimes there's too much of that, to what you pointed at earlier, and this needs and wants. When you work in that 2D world of delete and despec, you can overdo it. I like to think that there's a third D that we need. This third dimension is design, and that's designing smarter and making the most use of every square foot in the home, still providing all the function without deleting and despecking, just designing smarter, doing everything we need for bedroom, bathroom, and flex counts within a smaller envelope to deliver all that function. It's more function per square foot, if you will. Often we use that term a lot at Taylor Morrison, and it's comparable to miles per gallon on a vehicle, a combustion vehicle. Miles per gallon on how far you can go on a gallon of gas, and then function per foot. How many rooms and function in a home can you deliver in a square foot, or a total of 15 to 2,000 square feet?
So it's another great point, and this will, I'm going to have you back if you'll come back after this, because another one that I've, to that point, that function per square foot, I think that the real estate industry as a whole has been very slow, and not to say that they haven't at all, but I still think they focus a lot on that cost per square foot on the purchase side, as well as, and part of it's because on the sell side, we think a lot about that dollar per square foot on the retail value side. And so it's kind of, we've been in that something per square foot range for a while. And I think what you're saying is to try to think about it a little bit more in terms of like this holistic value per square foot. And this, so we're gonna 2.5 question. We're gonna add one more. So what do you think are some of the things that the industry can do to help move in that direction? Because as you and I have worked on projects before, we know that when we make houses smaller, they just by nature of the math, they become more cost per square foot. And then thereby, most likely, the sell price on those is more per square foot. Whether that's just how it is, but the affordability, it does translate it more to this absolute. So what do you think are some of the things that we can do overall in the industry to educate like the people even within the industry on how this is more important? Here's some examples of, it doesn't have to be bigger to make that number look better.
Yeah. Yeah, if we could catalog function or measure function, and we could then determine the function per total cost, or function per foot, right? Because it all boils down to the total cost today and what's the mortgage payment going to be. And some of those builders, advertise as payment, not total cost, right?
Yep.
They,
Yeah.
they're advertising payments because bottom line, that is the ultimate arbitrator on which home you can afford today based on the total price and the monthly payment. So the industry typically today measures bedroom and bathroom counts, and that's been going on a long time. But there's more to a home than just bedrooms and bathrooms, as you know. There's these flex spaces, which examples would be a study, a den, a loft, a media, a tech space, a playroom. All these extra rooms that don't often get or never really get properly cataloged in just bedroom and bath counts. So
Right.
if you do bedroom, bath, and flex, whatever label it might be functionally, but just call it a flex, now you've got a measure of the function of the home. And then you can say, well, I can get you 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and 1 flex for 430,000, or in a narrow entry-level product. Or if you want a luxury product, you get 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and 1 flex for 679,000. So they're the same function, but one is an entry-level product and one is going to be a luxury product. Of course, everything's smaller in the entry-level product. Everything will be bigger in the luxury product, but they have the same function in them: 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and 1 flex.
I'd be interesting to see, and I've seen some of the data and the analytics that you've put together, which in my opinion showcase some of your engineering thought processes in a way, how you've broken down a market, looking at the competition, looking at the square footage bandwidth and the bedroom bathroom counts, dissecting where it is, and where it lays out. And the first thing for me, I think that I knew was a value, but when you started putting this out in a way that we were looking at product from, let's make sure we're cataloging the bathroom type on the first floor versus the second floor, right? And we start to change the functionality. Is it just a half bath down there? Is it a full bath with a full bedroom? And you're seeing things like that now in California. I think what you see is so many builders are really, that is one of the things they do not want to delete or despec on. They're really hanging on to that, even if it's a small bedroom in the full bath for that guest. But I think it's interesting, and I would love to see, maybe, and this will not be allowed to be your answer to the next question, because I know that you can do this. So the next question is really like a bigger, thing is, I venture to believe that you could take your skills and your knowledge from some of the stuff that I've seen where you put things together and analyze it and start to create some of that value maybe even in a quantifiable version is the first step, right? Like, so back to that whole thing on the county records, we can't call that flex space a bedroom, but we know that if you go from a 3-2 to a 3-2 with a flex space, that there's usually more square footage, which is going to move the needle on the overall cost. And then if that flex is actually converted to a bedroom, we know there's a cost there that then does show up very easily, that I think there's a way to potentially quantify. And I'm looking forward to it. You heard it here, that I think there's a value matrix that I think, that you and all of your years of experience working for all these builders could probably start to put some things together and get that conversation going in terms of, and I've seen you show me, here's a plan that's 1,700 square feet, and here's one that's 1,550. I'm hypothetically, but I know there have been examples where you've redesigned plans and shown them to me. Take out 100 or 150 square feet, and yes, the cost per square foot is going to go up, but the aggregate total cost is going down, and it's designed better and it's got better function. And so someday I'm looking forward to it. You're going to help people understand that this is putting this thought into this design this way. We can have more value for lower costs for the homeowners. Because at the end of the day, that I think is a huge thing with the affordability, as you mentioned. It's a big problem right now, and costs are not coming down. An interesting statistic that just came out. I don't know if I love listening to the earnings calls. And so Lennar is the only one I think that's come out so far yet, and they're all about to start coming out next week. But Lennar's a month ahead of everybody's, and they reported 6% year-over-year cost reduction. And it's interesting because John Burns put something on LinkedIn yesterday or the day before. It actually, from not him himself, but he reposted it from his group, though, that they're about to release their 2025 market outlook survey, and their numbers are showing that builders are saying their costs are up 3% year over year. And so it kind of went into this discussion about scale. And so I think there's a big discussion to be had. And from what I love talking about this, and I hope some of our listeners, reach out to you and try to learn a little bit more about this value proposition we're talking about, because I did rough math and I would say that 9% swing, right? If Lennar's down 6% and everybody else on average is up 3%, that's a 9% swing. That's arguably about $20,000 in home costs. And I would tell you, this is where we get into those ranges again. If that Lennar home is in a neighborhood right next door to one of those others and they're down 6%, you're up 3, that's a significant disadvantage. And so what I was saying to people when I was talking about this, I said, size does matter. And I like how you brought up earlier. It's like there's these multitudes of things that go into what's important to a home. And size and scale matters if you're a builder, right? If you're Lennar, Horton, or Pulte, you're doing 20, 50, 80, 100,000. Yes, you're probably buying toilets for $5 cheaper than I am. Multiply that times 3 or 4, and you multiply that times the number of faucets and all the stuff, and you're buying cheaper. But it's important, but it's not the only thing. And can somebody doing 250 homes in one market in the Southwest, can they buy as good as Lennar? Probably not. But if they're also not designing efficiently, and I think you and I would share with everybody is that depending upon the division you go to for some of these builders, some of these large builders have better design than others. And you can probably leverage this value equation to show up with better product. Your cost isn't going to be as good, and we know that the margins are going to be, but you have something to compete and to stay relevant in the marketplace. And if you're not paying attention to it, you're losing an opportunity, in my opinion, to focus on the things that you can control. So with that thought, my final question for you, if you could share, so I like to call it the magic wand question, and all the guests are going to get asked this. So I give you the magic wand, and you can change anything in the home building industry. And it's something, as because I like to tell people that implementation is a lot harder than creation. So the magic wand thing, I like to get people thinking about, don't think about how hard it is. Like you get the easy wand and you can like make some change. What's the one thing you've been thinking about lately where you're like, I really would like to see this change happen in our industry?
Yeah, great question. If I had the magic wand, I would use it on this, which is, I think, our biggest obstacle today. Somebody asked me last week, what's the biggest obstacle you have today in production home building? Not only at Taylor Morrison, but at all the big builders. What's their biggest obstacle today from your perspective? And for me, it's clearly land. It's land acquisition, getting it at a reasonable cost and buying dirt, developing it in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost. Land development prices are just going through the roof, and the time and schedules are getting so long. And then the jurisdictional requirements or municipalities, local governmental body requirements that actually add more cost on top of this by stipulating certain design requirements, be they aesthetic or energy related, right? They both add costs. So if I had a magic wand, I would wave it that we could find more affordable dirt, develop it faster with less money, and have less governmental requirements on us that keep lifting our prices up.
Well, there you have it, folks. The product development guru and specialist went to land, and I can't help but I echo that sentiment. And this would be a topic for a whole other day. We won't go this rabbit hole, but I will ask you: have you heard much about Lennar's plan for the spinoff of their land strategy? That they're going to spin it off to another public entity called Millrose. They've been kind of dripping little bits of it like over the last 2 earnings reports. I can't wait till the next one that comes out because I'm hopeful that they're going to try to get it executed by the end of the year for them, which is November 30th. But have you heard much about it? And do you hear much talk from the industry and the people you hear about it? Like what they think? Is it positive? Will it help with what you just talked about there? Because that's what they're alluding to.
Yeah. Well, my impression of it is it's vertical integration of the land development process, right? So they'll eliminate the trade partner and labor restrictions that the rest of us face by hiring outside trades to help develop our dirt. They'll have it internally. So they'll have that capacity that none of us have internally. They will. So it will be a big advantage, I think.
It'll be interesting to see because it will be a publicly traded company. They say there'll be no Lennar leadership there, and I'm an optimist. You know me, and I think the best. when I heard Stuart Miller talking about it in the most recent earnings call, which he got a little bit more in depth, and he talked about the fee model, it sounded like, this was to better the industry. We know as a company, you want to grow your company and whatnot, but it's an interesting take, and I think we're all going to be excited to watch it unfold. And I think I just come up with one of my next topics. I'm going to have to talk about land and have a land expert on there, and see how it unfolds. But so as we wrap up, thank you again. What's the best way for our listeners to follow you and learn more about you? And is it other than is LinkedIn a good way? And we'll put your connection in the notes. Is that the best way for people to follow you and get in touch with you?
Definitely. LinkedIn is the best way. And thank you
Well,
for plugging that. And I'll take your recommendation for maybe a season 2 and come up with a different title than the current one. Again, the current title is How to Put More Home in Home Building. I think part 17 will be the last one, but I'll start thinking about a next chapter or a next season.
yeah, and then and I love that, because maybe the idea would be to go deeper behind the walls and the bones. I'll never forget being in a frame walk with you in the Sacramento market and having a framer look at us and say, these are some of the most cost-effective homes being framed in this market now. You can reduce your costs with thoughtful design. You don't have to just de-spec and delete. And I appreciate that. I've always loved that. And Brian, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate you enlightening our listeners with your knowledge and expertise. And hopefully we can have you back again sometime soon.
You bet. I'd welcome it. Thank you, Mike. It was a
All
pleasure.
right, take care. Thanks for listening to The Builder's Mindset with Mike DiGiovanni, presented by Amazing Mindsets. Remember, your mindset matters.